Sorry.
Oh, after we start, can I read you something?
Oh, sure, yeah.
It can go online.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody, from Chabad of Calabasas. Welcome to week number 3 of Soul Interviews. Last week we had my father here talking about the people that he looked up to when he was younger, people that he still looks up to, and it got so much positive feedback and it impacted so many people. It lifted the spirits of so many people from every part of the community, from Calabasas and clear across the world. It was really as one person put it, like cold water on a thirsty soul, on an exhausted soul. It was really good. And so it was so good that we're going to do it again. So, Ta, welcome back. Thank you for doing this last week, and thanks for doing this again. Mitzvah Shem, this week will have as much of an impact as last week. So, happy post Lag Boimer, and let's get started. You wanted to read something before we get going?
Yeah. I also hope that many other people will do this. People who have better memories than me with dates and names and things, but we've neglected it. You know, all the great people who came and went, and a few of them have a book written about them, which is very nice. But for people to have their personal experiences, it's a great thing to do. It's great for the person you're talking about, and it's great for the people who are talking about it, and for the people who are listening.
Opposite of Lashon Hara.
Yes. Good Lashon Hara. So let me read you this thing. It's just the kind of stuff that takes you into a whole new world. This is from the previous Rebbe's storytelling. He says that the Tzemach Tzedek, who was a grandson of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, when he was a child, he kept notes. He kept a diary. And he has many stories about his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. And one of the stories is as follows. The Alter Rebbe said, when I was 5 years old, I knew that we had two souls. As it says, Neshama Sani Yosisi. God says, I made souls, not just one type of soul, two kinds of souls. And that every Jew, man and woman, have both souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. This is like the first chapter of Tanya. Until then, people thought we had good moods and bad moods. Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. The Alter Rebbe tells us we have two souls. At that time, in other words, when I was 5 years old, I tried very hard to make sure that I understood all subjects deeply. Let me read it to you in Yiddish. Ich habe sich stark mishtadel gewesen und gelegt a starke Yegie, a das, was ich weiß, soll ich wissen le'emkei shel davar. That everything that I know, I should know deeply. That's at 5 years old. So I thought a lot about the difference between the two souls, because if they're both souls, and both created by God, what's the difference? What makes them different? It took me a certain amount of time, and with God's help, He illuminated my mind to where I realized that both souls, the godly and the animal, are spiritual energies that enliven and inspire all the other functions of the personality, the intelligence, the emotions, the will, and the pleasure. All of them are inspired by these two souls. The difference between them is the godly soul, its pleasure, its will, its understanding, and its emotions, also its thinking, speaking, and doing, is all directed and devoted to the study of Torah and the doing of mitzvahs and the acquisition of good character traits. The animal soul, even though it is also an energy and a spiritual thing, yet its perception of reality is all physical, material. It inspires all the other functions, the will, the pleasure, the understanding, the emotions, and the garments of thought, speech, and deed, but all in the material. When I thought about it more deeply, wenn ich hab tiefer betracht den Mohus Ruchni von den beiden Neshames, thinking more deeply, I came to understand that they have different methods of affecting the rest of the soul, the functions. The different methods are as follows. The godly soul is offenherzig. The godly soul is honest, artless, and factual. The animal soul is a liar, a shakran, and its very essence. And it tempts or seduces with all sorts of false temptations. In other words, the godly soul is simply truthful. It recognizes what is real, what is true, and that's what it wants. So how does it affect your thinking and your emotions? It tells you the truth. The animal soul is not about truth. The animal soul is about what benefits me. That's seductive. Its sales pitch is not do this, it's true. It's do this, it works. And that being not true is false. One more paragraph. After recognizing the true nature of the animal soul, God then illuminated my thinking on how it is you can identify when you're doing something permissible, not when you're doing a mitzvah, but when you're doing something physical, normal human activities. How do you know when it's coming from the godly soul or when it's coming from the animal soul? After a certain amount of time, I was also enlightened to understand that there is a third soul called the intelligent soul, Nefesh HaSichlis. That's actually the intelligence of the animal soul, which serves as a bridge between the godly and the animal. Because even the animal's intelligence is objective to some degree, because that's the nature of intelligence. So the intelligence of the animal soul can actually understand what the godly soul is saying. It doesn't have a natural affinity to godliness, but if you explain it, the animal soul can understand it. It certainly understands the attraction to the physical. It can also understand the attraction to the godly. And it's the intelligence of the animal soul that actually makes the choices. We have freedom of choice. Who chooses? Because the choice is between godly and material. So the godly will not choose material, and the material will not choose godly. So who makes the choice? The intelligence of the animal soul. And what does this intelligence give us? It enlightens us to the desirability of truth and the distaste for falsehood. What amazing. The Rebbe says, a while later, what does that mean? A week later? A year later? So by 6, he had this all down pat. So what does he say? There are two souls. One is godly, one is material. And they both animate an entire personality. The godly soul stimulates desire, will, intelligence, emotions, and behavior. And the animal soul stimulates desire and will and intelligence, emotions, and behavior. So you have actually two complete personalities. The difference between them is that the godly soul influences your will and your pleasure and your mind and your heart by presenting the truth. No hype. The animal soul, on the other hand, inspires your will and your pleasure and your mind and your heart and your behavior by appealing to the personal benefits. This works for you. This is good for you. This feels good. This is for your benefit. All of that is false. In other words, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. If it benefits, if it feels good, it's attractive.
Why did you get excited about this? This is all stuff that we have known before and that you have said before and that we have learned before. What got you so excited about this suddenly? Did you just see it for the first time, this particular sikha?
Yeah.
Oh,
What's exciting? What's exciting about it is this: when we learn it, like in the first chapter of Tanya, it sounds so impressive, high, deep, kind of unreachable, idealistic. When you hear that ever say, when I was 5 years old, I figured this out, it's like, whoa. Let's think about this again. It's just beautiful. It's not just an academic thing. It's a different world.
Benny texted me just now. He says, ask Tati how a Rebbe who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara figured this all out.
Right?
Maybe that's why it took him so long. He was doing a study. How does it resonate with a person who's a tzaddik v'tovlei and doesn't really know?
He read about it.
He read about it.
Right. He heard talk about it.
I got to tell you that Avremel has a song. Kishayirtza Adam Levare Liatzmaya. You have to ask yourself 7 things about any given subject. Mi, ma, lemi, asmi, masai, aye, eich, velama. When it comes to telling stories, even the Friedman Besiches, which Friedman Besiches are very similar to the Torah in that he could just teach it, but he chooses to teach everything through a story. Instead of just saying what you just said, he says that I heard from my father, who was told by his grandfather, who heard from his grandfather the following teaching. So it's a story. It's not just a teaching in midair. But anyway, when it comes to telling stories is an art form. Recounting memories is an art. And some people are good at the mi, some people are good at the ma, some people are good at the aye, some people are good at the eich, lama. In other words, some people, when you ask them to tell a story, their memory is so sharp, they remember exactly what happened, but they don't necessarily remember exactly when it happened. So they mix up the dates a little bit. Others remember what happened and when it happened, but not exactly where it happened, and so on and so forth. Others can remember exactly what. The most important thing is that many people remember a story when it happened, where it happened, who it happened to, etc. The only thing that they can't explain is why it happened. They can't explain to you, as he started off with this letter, this words from the Sikha, the oimek. Right? What was the first words of the Sikha that you just read?
Mm-hmm. I put great effort into understanding deeply l'imke shel davar.
Yeah, whatever I heard, whatever I learned, I tried to understand the depth of it. So
Right.
there are a lot of people that will tell you exactly what happened, when it happened, exactly where it happened. They'll get the dates right, but the story will not change your life because they don't really know why it happened. They don't know the depth of the story. So when you talk to different people, you get different benefits. I'm talking to you. I mean, you told me after the interview that you feel bad because you didn't remember exactly the right dates, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what people come to listen to you for, because you get all the dates right. People come to listen to you because you get the oyemik of the story right. That story of the Mendel Futterfast and the Mendel Morozov in 770, having a brief exchange about the Mendel Futterfast's difficult life, it touched a lot of people. And even if it didn't happen exactly in that corner of 770, or if it happened a different day than you remember it, it doesn't matter. The story is real.
Yeah. Well, for that, I didn't give a date. But actually, Mendel came out of Russia in 1963. I thought it was 67.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's okay. The Nakuda is there, that the essence of it is correct. So that is that. So what is it? So the Ben Chamush Lemikra is supposed to understand Rashi and Tanya without it being written. That's for a 5-year-old, at least for a 5-year-old Schneerson. Okay.
The Rebbe got married at 14 because he had nothing left to do.
Big rush.
At 13, he was ready to take on the world.
Big rush. All right. So last week we covered Folikan. Covered. We spoke about Folikan. We spoke about the Mendel Futterfass. We spoke about Uncle Yankel Krantz, and we spoke about the Rebbe. Hopefully, we'll talk about the Rebbe again this week. But let's begin. I'm going to bring up his picture, and I'll introduce him, and then you tell us what you think about. What thoughts come to mind when you see him?
Big beard.
A big beard. That's first thought. Also, the immense amount of copyrights pasted all over the picture also right away comes to mind. This is Rabbi Yoel Khan. Rabbi Yoel Khan was the Rebbe's chayzer. He was the one who was given the responsibility of listening, remembering, and understanding everything the Rebbe said in public. It was his job to record it after Shabbos or after Yom Tov, and then it was also his job to teach it, to explain it. So really, he was, as you said, the bridge between the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamas. Rabbi Yoel was the bridge between the Rebbe and the Chassidim, in a major way. The Rebbe spoke, and Rabbi Yoel it basically explained it, interpreted it, remembered it, and then taught what it means. So that is Rabbi Yoel. Solange Yodin, you should live many more happy and healthy years until the coming of Mashiach. Amen.
Amazingly, he turned 90 this year, and he came down with the virus, and he beat it. He overcame the virus.
They interviewed him right away when the thing broke. They interviewed him about it. Did you watch his interview? Somebody interviewed him.
I didn't see it.
Somebody interviewed him about, what do you say about this whole virus going on? And his basic answer was, everything that happens is designed to fulfill the purpose of Direh B'Tachtonim, of making this world a dwelling place for God. So therefore, this is no exception, and whatever happens and whatever is going to happen is all in that direction, and we have to try and see it. That was his answer. A little bit more than just saying everything is b'hashgacha pratis. Everything is by divine providence. But anyways, take it away. What's Rabbi Yoel's role in your childhood, in your life, etc.?
Rabbi Yoel was a teenager, 16 or 17 years old, when he asked the previous Rebbe whether he should come to New York to yeshiva from Lud, from Israel. And the Rebbe told him to come. So he took a ship, a slow boat from China. And when he arrived in New York, they told him that the Rebbe had passed away. This was 1950. And the Rebbe had passed away. So he was totally confused. What does he do now? He came to be with the Rebbe. We're talking about the previous Rebbe. He came to be with the Rebbe, and now the Rebbe passed away. So he asked an older chassid, which is what you're supposed to do when you're unsure. He asked the Shmuel Levittin
Close the door, please.
What he should do. I found out later that before he left Israel, his mashpia, Shoel Brook, told him what he's going to find in New York, the different characters, the different people. And concerning Reb Shmuel Levittin, Reb Shoel told Reb Yoel, you got all these names, Reb Shoel told Reb Yoel that when you hear something from Reb Shmuel Levittin, you got to think twice, because it's deep and it's meaningful and it's... So he went to ask Reb Shmuel, what should he do? And Reb Shmuel told him to ask the Rebbe, who was not yet Rebbe. So he went and he asked the Rebbe what to do. And the Rebbe said, if my father-in-law told you to come, he knew what he was saying and he knew what would be. So he told you to come, so you're supposed to be here. And the Rebbe drafted him at that very young age to become his scribe.
So you and Rabbi Yoel arrived in America the same year.
Yes,
that's the truth, right? Exactly. You were 4,
right?
And he was. Well, it was 1950, and he said he turned 90, so he was 20. My math is as good as your dates, but apparently he was something like 20. By the way, I want to interrupt you for a second and tell you that today is the anniversary of the day that you and I first met.
Yes, I was going to say happy birthday.
But yes, 42 years ago we met, and it was a good meeting.
Yeah,
a little bit loud.
Had a good impression.
A little bit loud, but thanks for today, for making today possible. It's been a good ride, Baruch Hashem. All right. So anyway, so he arrives in America, and you arrive in America, and here we are, 1950.
Yeah. So the first mimer that the Rebbe asked Rabbi Yoel to write up a hanocha,
a transcript.
Rabbi said, I can't do my Morim, because he wanted the Rebbe to write it.
So the Rebbe would speak, and the Rebbe asked him to make a transcript of what he said and write it in a formal, in a proper form, as opposed to just a transcript of the speech.
So all the previous Rebbes either wrote the Mimer and never said it. It was meant to be studied from the text. Or they wrote it and then said it. And sometimes they said it and then wrote it for people to be able to review. So when the Rebbe asked Rabbi to write up the Rabbi wanted the Rebbe to do it. So he said, I can't. It's too hard for me. And the Rebbe said, don't play games. This is your mission. Write it up. And he did, and that's the way it was the entire time. So Rabbi was born a genius. When he was a child, people were amazed by his intelligence, not just in learning, in everything, in math, just in logic. So the reason that he was able to memorize everything that Rebbe said in a 5-hour Fabrengen on 5 different topics is not because he has a photographic memory. There are people that I knew who had better memories, amazing memories. His gift was he saw the big picture, like a bird's eye view. He saw the structure. He saw where it was going. He saw where it turned right or left with possible explanations that didn't turn out to be the right explanation. He saw the picture. So when they would review, he would get together with a group of students and others right after the Fabrengen, before they were allowed to write on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and they would review it. There were young boys who had better memories. And they would say, no, the Rebbe used this word or that word. And Rabbi had to correct them because they thought that that was used in part of the answer when it was really part of the question. Or it was part of the question and they thought it was part of the answer. So they got the structure wrong. So when you have a bird's eye view, you see where things connect and how they all come together. So you don't need a photographic memory for the exact word. You've got the picture.
So they remembered what the Rebbe said, but they didn't necessarily remember why the Rebbe said it. Back to our point.
Yeah. So when we started learning Tanya for the first time, Rabbi was the teacher. And this was in Bedford before we got to 770.
You were how old, approximately?
16. We were actually the youngest class that went from Bedford to 770. Because Rabbi promised to be our personal teacher in 770.
So you went to 770 before you went to Montreal?
Right. For a year, the entire class, we all went to 770. Because Rabbi was going to teach us every day. It didn't work out so well.
Why?
It didn't fit his schedule, and he meant well, and he intended to do it, but it didn't happen. So after a year, some of us went to Newark, and some of us went to Israel, and some of us went to Montreal. But it was an amazing class, a lot of really impressive people. And that's what Rabbi wanted us to be in 770, so he could teach us. But of course, his effect was tremendous on everyone. So the primary memory of my first encounter with Rabbi, we were learning a mimer, And in the Maimer, it said that this quality or this midah is the internal dimension of another midah. This is the pnimis of this. I forget what the details were, but I didn't see the connection. Why would this be the pnimis of that? So I went to Rabbi and I said, why? Why is this the pnimis of this? And he looked at me for a moment and he said, what does pnimius mean? And I said, oh, I got it. That was like, first of all, his ability to immediately recognize where I was stuck. What was I not getting? It wasn't that I didn't understand the connection between A and B. I didn't understand what it means to be the internal of something. That's where the problem was. And he identified it immediately. But also, what he taught me was, don't use words you don't understand. That was not just an answer to a question. That was establishing a path along which to travel in all questions and in all issues and forever. So after that, anytime Rabbi was teaching something or bringing or whatever it was, I had to be there. So his clarity of thinking and his ability to identify a student's problem, that's a mashpia. That's somebody who sets you on your own 2 feet and tells you how to use your head. Rabbi is like a little bit out of this world. In the world of theory, he's a genius. In practical things, so my favorite story is that when he would teach us, and this was, I said, there were some very bright kids in this class, and they were under-challenged for many, many years. All the teachers we had before Rabbi Yoel didn't capture anybody's imagination, to put it mildly. So they were a little wild, undisciplined, and so on. With Rabbi Yoel, from the moment he walked in, we became students. We became sponges. We just wanted to hear more and more. And when the class was over, we were not happy. It was only an hour. It wasn't good enough. So Rabbi Yoel didn't wear a watch and was not very good with time and space.
Those 2 minor details.
Yeah. So there was a clock on the wall. That was, the old-fashioned clock that was plugged in with a long plug. So we had somebody sit at the wall where the plug was, and every 10 minutes they would pull out the plug. So they would stop the watch. And that way we kind of tricked them into staying an hour and a half.
But that says as much about you guys as it does about him. That's the truth. A mashpia needs a teacher needs students as much as the students need a good teacher. That's a great group of kids.
It was a good combination. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Is it possible to understand something, to understand the concept, and not be able to explain it? Or is it true that if you can't explain something, it is because you don't understand it? Because the reason I'm asking it is, you talk about the Rabbi Yoel, you come over to him and you ask him, how is A the inner dimension of B? And he says to you, what's an inner dimension? Right? He asks you to understand, what does this mean? And you line up 10 teachers, and 9 of them would not ask you that question. They would just answer whatever you asked, and you would walk away not understanding. But how could it be? How could it be that the good-hearted, wise teachers would allow a student to walk away without a complete understanding of what they're trying to teach them? Is it that there are people who understand things, but they're just not good at explaining it? Or is it that he understood things better than everybody, or he understands things better than your average teacher, and therefore he explained it better? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I think both things are true. There are people who understand very well. In fact, they understand it so well they can't explain it. In other words, they understand it on such a deep level, they can't translate it into simple language.
Have you heard somebody try to explain something on a level that's too high for the
Yeah.
teachers? Your teachers?
Yeah.
Too high.
Yeah.
I mean, you say under challenge. That means the explanations were too low. But,
No, we had one teacher. He wasn't really a teacher, but he would give a class once a week in 770. And he was talking about Eid Ein Sof, which is infinite light in English. So somebody said, "What does Eid mean?" He says, "Eid? Eid? Eid is Eid is it's Eid." He was so inspired by the idea, he couldn't put it in words. He had to calm down. So he was trying to, instead of trying to explain what it is, he was trying to convey how precious and how awesome, and that didn't come out in words.
So that has his own value.
The same worker, teacher, administrator, whatever he was, he came into 770 once, middle of the day. We were learning Gemara, and he bangs on the table for attention, and he says, "I just got to tell you this. I went to the doctor because I had headaches. You know what the doctor told me? My shoes are too tight." He says, "You understand what's going on? If the shoe is too tight, it can hurt your head." He was so excited. If there's something wrong at the bottom, it can affect the top. If there's something wrong in the practical, it can disturb the theoretical. Anyway, he was given to excitement about the idea more than the structure or intelligence of the idea. So he had a very hard time communicating. But I just read in that same Sikha that there was an individual, at times it's a Tzemach Tzedek, who was very generous with his time, and he taught people who had never heard of Chassidus. But he had a very difficult time explaining things. So he said to the Rebbe when he was visiting, he said, "I have a really hard time expressing myself." So he was saying, maybe I should stop because it's awkward. And the Rebbe thought about it and said, "No, you should continue teaching. And in reward, God should bless you with the ability to express yourself." And then the previous Rebbe writes, anybody who knew that man remembers that everything he said were like pearls. He became so expert at explaining things that people would come to listen to him just because of how beautifully he expressed it. So you can have a person who really knows but can't bring it down. Then you have a person who doesn't really know and then can't bring it out. So both things are true.
But how do you understand something in your head and not be able to explain it in your mouth? I don't mean to get off track here. We're supposed to be reminiscing about people.
Yeah.
But with Yoel, this is the discussion. How do you understand something in your head? You obviously have words in your head to explain it to yourself. Why can't you explain that to somebody else?
You know the experience of talking to yourself in your head? Some people think in thoughts, and some people think in language. It's like talking to yourself, literally, giving yourself a speech. That's how you think. So it depends on how abstract your thinking is. Thought doesn't have a language. You think in images. To go from that to words is for some people painful and frustrating because it limits, it restricts the idea. And you don't want to do that. You want the idea to be bigger than life. So some people have a hard time restricting or contracting their thoughts into something as klutzy as words. And you find this actually even among the greatest sages who wrote commentaries on Torah. Some of their writings are so easy to read. It almost reads itself because it's so well written. And other commentaries, their sentences and you don't know what they're saying. You got to really try hard to get what they're saying because their writing style was not so smooth. And one of the great things about the Alter Rebbe, both in the Tanya and in his Shulchan Aruch, is that he is so readable. L'shoinei hazohov, the Rebbe would say. So it's a gift to be able to bring things down into words when your mind is so excited and stimulated by the abstraction of the idea.
So does that mean that somebody who thinks on a lower level will be a better teacher?
Yes, for a lower level student, yeah.
So you have to have a guy who has a very high way of thinking, thinks in a sublime abstract, and then is able to talk it in simple language, and then you have an ideal teacher.
Yeah, I think eventually, if you're a good student, you get to recognize when a teacher has told you everything they know and there is no more. That's it. So sometimes you ask a teacher a question on what they taught you and they just repeat what they said. You say, I heard that, but how do you explain that? And they say it again. And you realize that's all they have. They have told you everything they know. You can't squeeze blood out of a turnip. On the other hand, you have teachers who explain something very impressively, and you get the distinct impression they're not telling you everything. They know more. There's more there, and they're not telling you. You get to develop a sense of that.
They're holding back.
Yeah, it's like singers. You know, they hit a high note, and then some singers, boy, that's it. They can't go any higher than that, or they're going to crack. And then others, you think, wow, they could have hit an even higher note. So you can see when a person has reached their breaking point. Almost in any area, in anything.
Ty, is my sound good? Can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. You hear an echo?
No, somebody complained that my sound is not good. Okay, so now that you have, so now after everything we just discussed, where does Rabbi fit into this?
I spoke to Rabbi not long ago, and I asked him to continue. He had these little clips that they put online, a 15-minute thought, and he was wondering whether it's effective, it's worth the time and effort. So first I was impressed. The man is pushing 90, and he's worried about his time. He's busy. Every 90-year-old should be so busy. Uh, so he asked me if I think it's worth the effort and if it's effective. I said it's very effective because people who hear this, even for 15 minutes, realize that Hasidus is meant to be understood. You're showing them that it can be understood. It's not mystical. You're demystifying it. And some people still have the impression that Hasidus is meant to nurture your soul in some mystical fashion, but you can't really understand it.
Right.
So Rabbi Yoel, in all the years, more than anybody else, made Hasidus understandable. And if you didn't understand it, you're failing. It's a personal failure because you should be able to understand. So I remember the first time Rabbi Yoel said to somebody, one of the students, he said, so what do you, we finished learning a mimer, and he says, no, so what do you know? These were smart kids. He repeated what the mimer said. Rabbi Yoel said, no, I know that the mimer knows. I'm asking you, what do you know? So the guy said, what it says. We learned what it says, so I know what it says. He says, you don't know. Tell me what you know and don't use the words of the mimer. This was a little radical because in previous generations, you weren't really expected to bring it down that earthy in your own words, in your own understanding. These are holy words. You're supposed to repeat them, memorize them. You chazer a mimer. You repeat it. You review it. You don't have your own knowledge of godliness. And to Rabbi Yoel, that was a failure. Now that you learned the mimer, what do you know? Of course, you know the mimer. That's not really called understanding. One time, one of the students said to Rabbi Yoel, can you make it in simple language? Can you simplify the idea? And Rabbi Yoel said, no. Strain your brain a little bit.
So, not all mashpiyim are like this. Not all teachers are like this.
Correct.
And not only that, you're saying that he broke the mold a little bit because he's encouraging people to explain things in their own words and to understand things in their own words. So is this, from the way you see him, is this because he understood that this is the calling of the generation, that this is the way the devil wants it, or because this is his personality and he expected people to understand everything that they heard or learned, or both?
That's the other thing about Rabbi Yoel. I think he was the first one to pick up on the uniqueness of the Rebbe's approach. There was a significant difference, although we don't want to hear that. The continuity of Hasidus is unbroken, and of course that's true in essence. But you gotta picture the destruction of Europe and the shift to America. And again, the Rebbe writes in 1940. He says, I came here to make America a place of Torah, and I am not fooling myself. I know how hard this is going to be, but we're going to succeed. How hard was it to, I don't want to give up the wrong impression, but to Americanize Hasidus, to make Hasidus work even in America? In other words, of course, essence doesn't change, truth doesn't change, Torah doesn't change. But don't tell me that you can do the same thing here that you did in Europe and it's going to be equally effective. The circumstances change, the environment changes, the challenges change. like that clip they're playing of the Rebbe in response to the virus, where the Rebbe says, if a new illness is introduced into the world, then there must also be a new cure. Old cures do not apply to new diseases. So Hasidim had a hard time picking up on the nuance of the difference between Europe and America and the Rebbe's original and unique approach. Rabbi got it. Maybe because he was so young.
Well, for sure, one of the problems was that the Chassidim did not see themselves as America. And when the Rebbe said that we're in America, and America is nicht anders, and we have to speak in the language of America, everybody thought, or a lot of people thought, that he was talking about the Austin. He was talking about the other Jews, who, the outsiders. And yet, actually, he was talking about the Chassidim in America as well. But the Chassidim in America are not the Chassidim of Europe, for better or for worse. Just so that the Chassidus has to be taught differently, even to the Chassidim, not only to quote unquote the Jew on the street.
Yeah. So it seemed to be like the call of the hour. The ultimate responsibility of Chassidim is to not let anything change. Don't give an inch. Remain the same. Exactly what we did in Europe, we're going to do here. America is not going to diminish or interfere. I guess for those people, that was right. They weren't going to become Americans. But what about the younger generation? So I think Rabbi was the first one to present Hasidus that didn't sound like an import. It didn't sound like Hasidus being transported or imported from Europe to America. It sounded like perfectly American.
But the Frierdiker Rebbe's Chassidim, the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidim, they weren't people that understood things and explained things in these kind of beautiful ways, the way he did. Were they exceptions, or was it that wasn't expected of everybody?
No, I'm not talking about the logic or the understanding. I'm talking about the new attitude or the freedom to think for yourself, to understand what you're learning in an earthy fashion, without the aura of bittul and who are you to understand. That's that shift. So it wasn't for many years that Hasidus began to sound like homegrown rather than imported. And that's part of what's so exciting about hearing Hasidus spoken in English. It stopped being a European import. And Rabbi was key to this shift.
It's interesting. So the way he explained Chassidus in Yiddish inspired Chassidus in English, which is practically 100% what happened.
Yes, he made it possible.
And all the shluchim that went out and opened the Chabad houses from your class or from your age were taught by him. I mean, American.
Yes, yeah, pretty much so. It also made shlichus possible. That makes sense? If you don't really get it in your own terms, as low as they may be, if you don't really get it, you can't be a shliach. So in the previous generations, those who really understood Hasidus became rabbis in communities. You become a Rav, you become a mashpia, you become a sheikhet, because you're expert in the subject. But the expert is loyal to the, is loyal to the word of the halacha, to the word of the maimer, you can't be a shliach. A shliach has to think for himself and take personal responsibility for his city, for his country, for his continent. There could not be shluchim beforehand. Beforehand, you had people who were servants to Judaism, not shluchim of Judaism. A servant does what he's told, repeats what he heard, loyally, loyal to the word, loyal to the no language of your own. That would be considered blasphemous. So to be a shliach, you really have to be able to speak in your own vocabulary, in your own language, in your own words, and have it be meaningful. That was the risk. People said that Rebbe is sending young couples out to places where they're the only Hasidim, maybe even the only observant Jew. How is that going to work? It's very dangerous. They're going to be overwhelmed by their environment. They're going to start discussing subjects with people who are cynical or critical and smarter than them. They're going to be misled. They're going to lose everything they have. So even if you're going to send a young couple out on shlichus, send them for a year and then bring them back and undo the damage. The Rebbe says, you ain't coming back. You're not coming back. Go and stay. You want to visit once in a while to buy chocolate on Kingston Avenue? Okay. It's an amazing thing. So Rabbi Yoel actually was the key to the whole thing. Eventually, it was contagious, and it spread to Israel. A lot of shluchim come from Israel. Most of the shluchim, I think, in the former Soviet Union, most of them are Israeli.
Yeah.
And they're going to places nobody would want to go. Siberia.
Yeah.
Uzbekistan.
They're going back to the places we ran away from.
Imagine some guy going on shlichus to where his grandfather was tortured to death in Siberia.
So one day, many years ago, I was teaching in a yeshiva, and something happened with one of the students in the yeshiva. He was caught with some contraband, etc., and he was expelled from the yeshiva. And I was very upset. I was very young and idealistic, and I was very disappointed in the boy. I was very disappointed that after all of the learning that we'd done together and all of the bring-ins that we'd had, that he was hiding this all along, and it was very discouraging. So we had a conversation, you and me, and the conversation was basically about Rabbi Yoel, actually, about the difference between the way Rabbi Yoel encouraged people to deal with their animal soul, and the difference and the change that he introduced from the way it had been done in Europe. You remember? I mean, I don't know if you remember the conversation, but
I do, and it's a very big topic.
Yeah.
One of the significant changes in the Rebbe's approach is that soul-searching kind of activity, trying to repair yourself internally, is no longer the focus. The Rebbe put us in charge, made us feel responsible for the world, which is basically the idea of Mashiach, a perfected world. The world needs to be repaired. The world needs to be perfected. The world needs to be enlightened and elevated. And to spend a lot of time and energy on perfecting yourself suddenly seems petty and inappropriate, inexcusable. When the whole world is waiting to get basic life needs like Aleph Bays, and you're trying to fine tune your inner working so that it's no longer a mitzvah. In fact, it's a negative now. Too petty, too personal, too selfish. So the Rebbe's response to personal failure, of a weakness of character, giving in to sin, clean yourself off and get back to work. Stop. Don't wallow in that stuff.
Even in trying to.
Yes. In the olden days, the mashpia would give you all sorts of direction, advice, and how to fight this and how to struggle and how to. And the Rebbe would say, it's bad enough that you spend 10 minutes on this problem. Now you're going to spend hours on it? Stop it. Get back to work. And the more enthusiastic you are in doing the job that needs to be done, the less time you'll have to worry about negativities. That was a major change in the character of a chassid. So people who say nothing's changed, it's all the same, that's too simplistic.
So how did Rabbi Yoel push this? How did he teach this?
Exactly the way the Rebbe would. Somebody would come to him and say, Rabbi Yoel, I sinned, I gave in. And Rabbi Yoel would say, leave me alone, boy. What is that?
Did people treat him like that? Like a personal mashpia, the way...
Oh, yeah. Hundreds over the years.
So he dealt with people personally, not just in...
He is a mashpia. He's the mashpia.
Right.
So I got to tell you, as recently as 2 years ago, it was the weekend when all the shluchim were in New York. Rabbi Yoel is in awe of a shliach. Every shliach. So anyway, it was Shabbos, and Rabbi Yoel was speaking. So I went to hear what he was saying in the shul where he davened. Afterwards, he calls me over privately. He's got to tell me something. He says, when shluchim are in town, you should be with them, not with me. He was saying, like, when will you graduate from me already? Move on. There are shluchim. Go spend time with the shluchim. What are you hanging around me for? Is that a mashpia? And I didn't ask him anything. It was on his own initiative. And he's so gentle about it.
You weren't the only person in the show listening to him.
No, of course.
So he said, give you a hard time.
He says, you were once in my class, right? So I have a right to tell you this. I was once in his class, right?
Did he when he was your teacher, or from what you remember him, did he go out to the Chabad houses? Did he ever deal with Balabatim? Did he ever speak to people in broken English, or he stayed in 770?
No, there were people who the shliach didn't have the information or the knowledge that the balabos had. In other words, he needed somebody to impress the balabos, the supporter or congregant, with more information than the shliach had. So they really wanted to impress somebody very intelligent. They would take him to Rabbi Yoel. Rabbi Yoel would speak in Yiddish, Hebrew, or Russian. Very little English. So if anybody understood any of those languages, they would bring him to Rabbi Yoel. So I remember one time somebody brought a professor of mathematics, supposed to be one of the top mathematicians. Jewish guy whose Yiddishkeit was kind of schwach, brought him to Rabbi Yoel. And it was Shabbos afternoon, and the man started saying something, the professor started saying something, and he said, but aside from the mathematics, it's too complicated. Rabbi Yoel said, no, tell me. Rabbi Yoel was a genius in mathematics. And the professor was absolutely blown away. Didn't expect that. So yeah, people would. There was one time when Rabbi Yoel went on Miftzah Tefillin, but he was so not his. But he was in awe of every shliach. Would cross the street when he saw a shliach. Would cross the street just to shake his hand.
So go back for a second. The Rebbe's attitude, which Rabbi Yoel basically interpreted for the people. If you have internal rot, if you have an animal soul, you should not wrestle with it. You should be above it and get to work in doing good things. What happens to your internal issue? What happens to the problem which a generation ago or 2 generations ago would have been cured, maybe? And now you're saying just leave it and deal with something higher, something better. So what happens to that foul part of a person's character?
Not feeding the animal soul of the Yetzer Hara weakens it. Because the Yetzer Hara is like a parasite. It needs attention. It needs to draw life from holiness. If you ignore it, if you don't give it expression, if you don't let it exercise its will, it gets weaker. That's why if you create an environment in which the particular sin that a person is subject to is just not available, and a month goes by where he doesn't sin because it wasn't available, the appetite is weakened, not strengthened. So if you're going to work on yourself, even today, work on something noble. Work on being more generous, more refined. Work on being a little more humble. Not on the grubby, ugly stuff. That stuff you just have to ignore. And part of the rationalization, the evil of today, the darkness of today, is the absence of light. It's not like the plague of darkness in Mitzrayim, where the darkness was a substance and you had to beat it to death with plagues. Today, the darkness is simply a lack of information, a lack of light. So to fight it is pointless. How do you fight darkness? So the expression is, you can't sweep darkness out with a broom. Why? Because there's no substance to the darkness. It's just the absence of light. And that is good news, by the way, that the darkness of the world today is not the darkness of yesterday.
Okay, but let's talk, for example, about a person who has a really bad temper. Just an example of a foul trait. And he goes to Rabbi Yoel and he says, "Look, I want to be a mensch, but I can't control my anger. I get angry way too often, and I stay angry for way too long. So what should I do?" And Rabbi Yoel would say, "What would you say?
What would be the best answer? What would you say?"
What's the matter with you? I don't know. Get angry at him. Tell him how ugly it is.
I tell you the story about this little girl in Israel who thought God was angry at her.
Yeah.
So I said to her, God is angry at you? When did you become so important?
Yeah.
A person who justifies his own anger is not just suffering from temper. He's suffering from a little delusion about who he is. People get angry because they allow themselves to get angry. They don't really lose control. They allow themselves to behave outrageously up to a point, never beyond that point. So they don't lose control. So when you say to a person who comes to you and says, what am I going to do? I have a terrible temper. I get angry at people. And you say to them, I don't care. Who cares? You're not that important that your failure or your problem should be so important. So you get angry. Who cares? That gets to the heart of the problem. But if you take him seriously, oh, really? You lose your temper. I wonder why. Did somebody hurt you when you were a child? No.
So
You're not getting any more attention because you don't deserve it.
So when you brush off anger or temper issues as being beneath, as being insignificant and laughable, it can change a person's anger issue.
Sure, certainly. Again, because
To the Rebbe about very serious things.
Yeah.
And the Rebbe said, stop thinking about it, just move on.
Or give more charity.
Right.
In other words, go for the positive. Stop. And the more energy you put into the positive, the less energy there will be for the negative. But particularly with the question of temper, people often say, I lose control. And they think that that's a confession. It's not. It's a cop-out. You don't lose control. We're getting away from our intended purpose here, but this guy said, my wife got me so angry, I lost control and I hit her. I said, really? Did you hit her with a bat? He says, oh, don't be crazy. Oh, don't be crazy? You lost control. Why didn't you hit her with a bat? Why didn't you kill her? Oh, don't be crazy. In other words, even at the height of your anger, you were in control.
It's a controlled explosion.
Controlled, yeah. Anyway, so let's get back to the Rabbi.
Okay.
If you want an example
Yeah.
of a character molded, purified, refined through knowledge and through learning, where learning Hasidus changes you, this is a perfect example. You can see in everything he does, everything he says, the way he behaves, the way he acts, it's all so thoroughly mindful. Even though he has his fanatical impulses where he thinks to the extreme. But the character is just beautiful.
In general, last week's interview was an exercise, a discussion about living from the top down and not from the bottom up. About living the way you know you should live, and not living the way your habits have carved out for you just because that's the way your circumstances dictate. And you're talking about people who did that during the Soviet Union, and now you're talking about somebody who did that in America. Rabbi.
You know, it was a very prominent tradition in Russia, that when you got together to fabring and to inspire each other and to reach deeper into yourself, you drank. You said l'chaim. And they had some pretty strong spirits back there, like 96% alcohol. We tried it once back in Montreal. We didn't realize paper cups can't hold that kind of alcohol. It eats right through it. So it's really powerful stuff. And they drank it like it was water on the occasions of a fabringen. That carried over into America until the Rebbe said no more. Rabbi Yoel had no problem with that. No more is no more. So when a chassid from Russia came to America and said, come, say l'chaim, Rabbi Yoel made a point of saying, this is not a custom. You don't just say l'chaim out of habit. In Russia, it worked. In America, that was shocking to an old-time chassid.
But people complain to the Rebbe that they don't have a way of shedding their frustrating way of thinking and their frustrated way of that feeling that drives them nuts. So that's why they have to say l'chaim so that they can loosen up a little bit, take the edge off, and then be open to changing at a fabringen the way you're supposed to change for the better at a fabringen. And the Rebbe said, too bad, figure out a different way to do it. Figure out a different way to do it. Alcohol is not the answer anymore. So what's the different way of doing it from the mind?
Well, Rabbi Yoel's explanation at that occasion was, I'm not about to do any soul searching right now. We sat down to fabring because it's Yantif, and I don't want to do soul searching. So why would I say l'chaim? Because that's what you do? What is that, a custom? There's no custom to say l'chaim. So people who say l'chaim at every occasion. So maybe if you really are struggling with some internal issue and you really need to get it out, and it would take hours and hours of self-hypnosis or deep therapy, and a few drinks can loosen you up enough, it's medicinal. It's not a custom.
By the way, 96% is medicinal.
It's fatal.
No, but the Rebbe the Rebbe said there's only a minimal amount, but the Rebbe obviously was challenging the Chassidim to figure out a different way to get past your artificial, superficial surface. But what was the Rebbe asking for?
So one of the secrets the Alter Rebbe would say a maimer, it would take about 7 minutes. And it would inspire people for years. In other words, the energy was so intense that the mass didn't need to be very, very big at all. Each generation added more and more words to the concepts. By the time it came to the Rebbe Rashab, who was called the Rambam of Hasidus, the Maimarim were not only long Maimarim, but they were Hemshechim. The same theme continued on in the next Fabringen, in the next Maimar. So there can be a theme that lasted a year and a half. The same theme for a year and a half. That's like tenderized meat. You hardly have to chew it. It's already been tenderized for you. By the Rebbe, what he was teaching was not only tenderized in advance, it was already chewed over. It was already processed intelligently so that all you had to do is hear it. So what the Rebbe was saying is, Hasidus has been given to you so ready to use. Just pop it in the microwave. Just remember to take it out of its package. So Hasidus is so much more available to immediate application that just let it have the effect and you'll get there. And primarily by thinking of someone else.
Okay, we'll move on to somebody else because there's no end. There's no end to this conversation. So.
Okay, so let me just tell you one more thing about Rabbi.
Okay.
The Rebbe wanted somebody to put together an encyclopedia on Hasidic thought, because Hasidic thought is encyclopedic, covers every subject, it covers everything. There is so much that if you have to go looking for it, it would take a long time to find it in the massive library of Hasidic works. Rabbi was given the job of writing the encyclopedia. When they showed the Rebbe the first galley, the Rebbe said, I knew he could do it, but this well I didn't expect, which is an awesome compliment. I mean, so just one little, there's an encyclopedia on the Talmud, the Encyclopedia Talmudis. Look up the entry under love, Ahava. There are 3 or 4 pages. Look up love in Rabbi Yoel's encyclopedia. There are 80 pages. And there's no repetition. This is encyclopedia, not discussion or analysis, just ideas about love, the various levels of love, the various types of love, the degrees of love, what brings love, what interferes with love. 80 pages just on love. What are you going to have on Tzimtzum or creation or the oneness of God? It's awesome. And Rabbi goes to work every day at this advanced age. His body is, but the mind is there, and he goes to work every day, and that's, I think, what protected him during his bout of corona. His purpose. He has to get it done. Nothing's going to stop him.
Well, then he's going to be alive for a very, very long time.
Yeah, because out of the 22 letters of the alphabet, he has 21 to go.
He just released another volume, right? A few months ago.
Aleph, yeah. He's still in Aleph. No, but the good news is that when he first started the project, he immediately did the big subjects. He didn't go according to the alphabet.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, that's not good news. Like this, he'll have to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
Zol Zayin. Okay, let me show you our next picture. Can you see who that is?
Yeah, that is the first Hasidic boy I got to know.
Okay, there's 2 faces in this picture. The one on the peripheral, the one on the side, is you, yes?
It's hard to see, but yeah.
This is you. The hand behind the boy, the man in the middle is Zalman Deitch, Alav Shalom, and the hand is the hand of my father-in-law, Rabbi Still. And you're all listening to Ben Shem Tov. But in any case, this is Rabbi Zalman Deitch, Alav Shalom of Crown Heights. So what does the picture tell you?
Zalman was one of the boys in our class, but his maturity level was like light years above the rest of us. Obviously, he passed away at a very young age. Because if he passed away yesterday, it would still be a young age. And he crammed more life into the years that he had than people who live to be 100. The wisdom, the das, from a very young age. I remember once we were sitting and talking on his porch on Crown Street, and his father walked by and said something and continued on. And Zalman sat there thoughtful. And finally said, when my father says something, I really got to think about what he means. Whoa, that was to me a big surprise. You don't hear that from teenagers. Maybe they don't have that kind of father, but they also don't have that kind of maturity. So here's my introduction to what a Hasidic boy is like. We were in the same class, in Rabbi's class, and after school, which was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, we would come back to Crown Heights, and after supper, we would get together in a little shul on Montgomery Street, Ungar shul. The Ungars lived upstairs of the shul, so the shul remained open most of the night. But it was empty, it was quiet. So we would meet there and study. At least we intended to study. Anyway, Zalman was far more mature. And when he learned something, he learned it on a mature level. So we would study like a mimer, and he would say, so what does that mean? And I would explain it. He'd say, yeah, but what does it mean? I would explain it again. He wasn't asking, what does it mean in terms of understanding? He meant, so what does it mean in life? So therefore, what are we supposed to do? How does that change me? And so on. And we were kids. We were babies. Anyway, we learned whatever amount of time we could learn, and then we got off into conversations. And one particular night, we sat for a long time, got into all sorts of, and then I walked into his house. We sat on his porch for a while, not realizing that the night had gone and the sun was coming up. Anyway, we met again in the morning, later in the morning, in the hallway of the yeshiva. And I said to him, Zalman, did you daven Ma'ariv last night? We had skipped Ma'ariv. Anyway, we went to class all day long. And then at night, Rabbi taught us Chassidus. It was like 7:30 at night after a long day of school. Anyway, for some reason, Rabbi decides to tell us a story. And the story was of a famous chassid. who as a young boy would memorize or study every mimer that he heard from the Rebbe on a very deep and thorough level. And his custom was that after the Rebbe would give a mimer on Shabbos afternoon, he would go out into the garden and sit down in the shade and close his eyes and review the mimer. And he had great concentration. So he would, for hours, he would sit there reviewing and analyzing and studying and absorbing the mimer. When he was in his old age, advanced age, the previous Rebbe was traveling with his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and they came to this town where this chassid lived. I believe his name was Gershon Ber, and they stayed at his house. So Gershon Ber gave the Rebbe Rashab, his room, and the previous Rebbe, Gershon Ber, slept in the other room. There were only 2 rooms to the house. So the previous Rebbe, as a child, saw this chassid prepare to go to sleep and recite the Krish Mishal Amita, the Shema, before you go to sleep. And there's a sentence there where you say, you're asking God to help you, and Shalei Oshuv Oid Lahachisecha. You ask God to protect you, that you shouldn't again do something to anger God. And when it came to those words, Reb Gershon Ber cried like a baby. The next day, the Rebbe Rashab asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, what did you see? What did you learn? So he said he was very impressed that Reb Gershon Ber would cry and the Rebbe told him, you know what he's crying about? When he was a teenager, he once sat in the garden and reviewed the Rebbe's mimer. It was Shabbos afternoon after Mincha. He sat there so long that when he opened his eyes, it was Sunday morning. And now, 50, 60 years later, he still cries every time he says, I don't want to anger you again. He cries over that Ma'ariv that he missed. So I was sitting in the row in front of Zalman, and that struck me like, oh, of all stories that Rabbi could tell us that day, wow. So I turn around, like, hey, divine providence strikes again, right? Reb Zalman had his hat down over his eyes, and he was crying. For a teenager to have that sensitivity, I was blown away. But then later I figured out, no, he wasn't a teenager. He was never a teenager. He was an old soul. And he's a legend in Crown Heights. His father passed away at a young age. He lost a brother, 2 sisters, all at a young age. He had to take over his father's business while he was still in yeshiva. Just an amazing guy.
I met him in a barbershop in Crown Heights many years ago. I recognized him, and I knew that you were friends with him. He came to Minnesota for the wedding, right?
Zisi's wedding.
The wedding. The first wedding in the family. Anyway, so I said to him, Rabbi Deitch, my name is Rabbi Friedman, and I told him who my father is, and I said, I understand that you were friends with my father when you were younger. And he said, yeah, and he says, ask your father, or tell your father that Zalman Deitch is reminding him about the winter of 1960-something in Montreal. I don't remember what year he mentioned, but he said, we had a winter in yeshiva that year. What a great winter. Tell your father, or ask your father if he remembers the winter of 1965 or 66 or whatever. So apparently you had some very, very good times in yeshiva.
Those were the best years, those 2 years, 65, 66. 2 years, and we talked about this, about Rabbi Isaac.
Yeah.
But also, the dormitory was not organized for the amount of students that came in. So it just so happened that Zalman and I shared a room in a house belonging to an elderly man who lived alone. So I got to have all his attention. Later, I found out that quietly on the side, Zalman was taking care of all the old man's needs, his papers, his all his legal stuff, his finances. Zalman took over. Reb Zalman. He was a teenager. He devoted himself to taking care of this old man, sweet old man. But he was all alone. And I found out that, without any fanfare, he was devoted to helping one of the students who was kind of wild and out of control, spent hours with him, turned him into a real mensch. There were so many things that Zalman was doing extracurricular and never missed a minute of school. So he was bigger than life. His children were amazing. And for some reason, they were not destined to live very long.
What do you say to the yeshiva bachim of today, or to us, about, you talk about a guy who's larger than life, but what practical application could you take away from Zalman Deitch and the way he lived and the kind of a person that he was? I mean, in general, I can't identify with the kind of 14-year-olds that you were. Just very, very serious 14-year-olds. And yet you liked Mickey Mantle, which to me is, I don't know. It's is it a lost art, or is it, in other words, is it nature or nurture? Was it like a generation after the war was a very serious generation, or were you taught right, or your parents were survivors, so you were different? How can we recapture, not in a morose way, but just in a healthy way, that kids should be more serious about these kinds of things? They're so out of reach to most kids. They barely comply with it, let alone take it very seriously. They cry over a missed prayer.
Okay, before we continue with this, are you suggesting there was something wrong with Mickey Mantle?
You once suggested to me that there was something wrong with Mickey Mantle. In fact, you suggested to me that there was something very wrong with Mickey Mantle. Not his ability to hit a home run. But
there were people who thought that anyone who, there were two teams in New York. There were the Yankees and the Dodgers. Yeah. And the Dodgers were like the losers, the underdog. And the Yankees were these arrogant winners. So there were people who felt that if you were a Yankee fan, you were corrupt. If you were a sensitive soul, you were a Dodger fan.
That is an eternal truth, by the way.
Right. Anyway, just off the record, Mickey Mantle has a son who's Jewish and frum.
A what?
A son. He got a Jewish girl pregnant.
Yeah. Who? Mickey Mantle?
Yeah. And they gave the child up for adoption.
Don't tell me you're Mickey Mantle's son.
No, but I have such pity on the guy. You're Mickey Mantle's son and you can't even tell people?
Mantelovich.
How frustrating, huh?
Mantelovich.
Yeah. Anyway, so in answer to your question,
yeah,
on the one hand, we have to think positive, that the times change and the needs change. So if Talmidim, students today, Bachrim today, don't have that kind of perspective or that kind of interest, maybe it's just not necessary. Let's try to put a positive spin on it. But it's sad that they have no conception. They have no awareness of this. And that shouldn't be. You got to know how beautiful and how great life can be from in all directions, deep as well as wide. So the chassid of today has a very wide perception. Like we were saying before, a very global perception of godliness, which I guess is what's most necessary today. But to not have an appreciation for the depths of it gives you a two-dimensional Judaism. You should have a three-dimensional. And, this is one of my favorite themes anyway. We learn a lot, we know a lot, we have access to all sorts of information like never before. So the two dimensions of Torah and Judaism are very highly developed. But it's not three-dimensional. We don't go deep, and that's sad. Maybe not crucial. I feel it's almost like after Mashiach comes, we're going to look back at Golus, nostalgically and say, whoa, those were good days. We don't need them anymore, but they were good days. So at least you have good taste in what to yearn for, or what to retain as a good memory. But concluding with Zalman, he made us all feel like such babies. There were many of his friends who were much brighter than him, knew much more, understood much more, had all sorts of talents and all sorts of abilities that were really impressive. When they were sitting next to Zalman, they felt like babies. Talented babies. So when we would fabring together, we would have some fun and everybody would show off a little bit, cute expressions and brilliant criticisms and insights. And Zalman would sit there and we would notice the look on his face and we would always, let's get serious here. Let's get sober.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put up two pictures. Hopefully it's going to work. Can you see two pictures?
Yeah.
Okay. With this, we will conclude. Hopefully not anytime soon. So in the one picture, in the color picture, you have Professor Yitzchak Block. In the other picture, I think that's him also on the right, yes?
Yeah.
And in the middle, you have Professor Yankel Hanoka. And of course, Rabbi Lou, who I hope will do this one of these days. Soll sein gesund und stark. So you have Professor Block and Professor Hanoka. Professor Hanoka became your mechutin, married Yossi, his daughter married Yossi, Miriam. And Professor Block became your mechutin because Yossi and Miriam's daughter married his grandson. But before these people became your mechutanim, Professor Block and Professor Hanoka, you talked about them a lot, from what I remember. So could you talk about them a little?
Professor Block grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. He was influenced deeply by Zalman Posner, who was the rabbi of the synagogue there in Nashville, Tennessee for many, many years. And Rabbi Posner brought a teenager, Yitzchak Block, to 770. To make a long story short, he fell in love with Yiddishkeit, and he wanted to join the yeshiva and sit and study about what happens when two people fight over a shmata. He just loved it. And he wrote to the Rebbe that he wants to quit school, in which he was doing very well, and just sit in yeshiva. And the Rebbe said, not a chance. He went to college, became a professor in Greek philosophy. Can you believe this? He was totally, thoroughly a chassid, through and through, with a long beard curled up. And he was a professor. And not just any professor, a professor of philosophy. And not just any philosophy, Greek philosophy. What an amazing contrast. It seems like he was one of the experts in North America on Aristotle. Naturally, when they had a pagisha, when they invited college students to Crown Heights for a weekend, which is what that second picture is from, it was natural that the speaker would be Dr. Block, a chassid who was also a professor and a philosopher. His talks at the pagisha were mind-blowing for me. I was still in yeshiva at the time, and I would sneak out to listen to him and to Rabbi Posner and the other speakers. He was a professor at the university in London, Ontario. Tiny little town. Very little Jewish resources. But it wasn't terribly far from Toronto, so. But in that little town, which he desperately wanted to leave, and I know that so many times he wrote to the Rebbe, please, can I just get out of here and spend all my time davening and learning? And the Rebbe wouldn't let him. The Rebbe wanted him to publish. And he hesitated, couldn't bring himself to do it. You know, when he would teach philosophy, he had to keep a straight face and make it look like he was serious. And finally, he did publish. And he told me personally that he regrets he should have published more, because the effect that it had on the academic world, in the academic world, would have been worth every moment. At any rate, when he would come to pagishas, and in those days, college students were still serious students of higher learning, which is what universities were known as. They were serious. They had questions. They wanted answers. It wasn't frivolous. And of course, when Dr. Block spoke, it was about philosophy. How can you prove the existence of God? And how do you know? And what and all these questions. Good questions. Every year, Dr. Block presented amazing explanations and insights. And one year, Friday night, he surprised everybody. And he said, you know, with his southern drawl, he said, every year I come here, every year you ask me these philosophical questions. Every year I give you the answers because, you know, I do this for a living. So boring. I do this all the time. And I can prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists. And I can prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that God created the world. And I can prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. I've done this before many times. I don't want to do this anymore. Because after I finish explaining all of this and proving all of this to you, you say, oh, good. And then you go back and do exactly what you did before. So this year, I'm not answering any philosophical questions. Whoa, what is this? He said, instead, I'm going to tell you a story. Story about a Jewish soldier in the Russian army who during World War I think it was, doesn't matter. He was in the trenches, and through the fog and the rain, he saw a German soldier rising up. So he shot him. And as the German soldier was falling, he heard the German soldier say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Russian soldier was rushed back to Moscow because he had a nervous breakdown. Oh, anybody have any question about why he had a nervous breakdown? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. He said, what, nobody has any question? He was a professional soldier. He killed many people. Why did he have a nervous breakdown? If you have a question, raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. He said, doesn't this puzzle you? It was self-defense. If he hadn't shot the German would have shot him. Why did he have a nervous breakdown? Raise your hand if you have that question. Nobody raised their hand. He said, okay, now that we have established that you are insanely Jewish, now you can ask me philosophical questions.
That's beautiful.
It was so amazing. You know, people left that weekend changed forever. I later found out that Dr. Block, I spent Shabbos with him. He invited me to come speak for his students. He had a chair in his dining room where he would sit and learn. Hours. Deep, deep concentration. Shabbos morning, when I came into the dining room, he was already sitting there, deep in thought. Couldn't interrupt him if I wanted to. Same chair every day. He learned a mimer from L'Kutei Torah or Torah, like a chassid of old, but in a very new package. The combination was just stunning. In fact, that Mendel Futerfas, when he came out of Russia, he ran around the world collecting money to send packages of goods back to Russia to people who had lost their jobs because of their activities in Judaism and were simply starving. So he sent them these packages that kept them alive. He would send them, American dungarees, jeans that they could sell for a nice profit, and that kept them alive. Anyway, so he would run around raising money for these packages, they were called. So he came to London, Ontario, and he stayed with the professor. Shabbos morning, the professor said to him, let's go to the mikveh. He says, you have a mikveh here? He says, yeah, come. It was the middle of the winter. They went to an overpass over a lake or a river. And under the underpass, they could have access to the water. This professor of Greek philosophy went to the mikveh every morning in the freezing lake. Sometimes he had to break the ice. Now in Russia, that was not so unusual. So when they got there, Mendel said to him, oh, I kind of forgot what that tasted like. It's been a while since I had to go to a frozen lake. But this is the professor, all the years that he was there. So it was an amazing combination of the real thing repackaged. And the effect that he had on students after he passed away, the amount of letters and a thorough, deep impression that he made on people with his sincerity, with his brilliance, with his kindness, just an amazing human being. With the additional quality of the simplicity and honesty of an American kid. The kind of chassid that the Rebbe created out of nothing. Same is true with Dr. Hanoka. Everything he had in Yiddishkeit came from the Rebbe. Produced in America. Dr. Hanoka was a brilliant scientist. He held 22 patents of things that he invented, that he and he was probably the only frum professor who would defend the belief that the world is 5,780 years old. All other professors had to compromise. They felt they had to compromise. And he himself said, this is hard. Defending the age of the universe against the public, popular opinion, and very hard. But if that's what the Rebbe says, then that's what I do. Again, completely original. Made in America, chassid.
You knew Professor Block, Professor Hanoka, and Professor Green. Velvel Green, who I didn't put his picture up here. We'll talk about him maybe a different time, because that's a whole different topic. But you had Velvel Green, you have Yankel Hanoka, and you have Yitzchak Block. You grew up in the golden era. You definitely lived in the golden age of the Rebbe's revolution. It's amazing. The kind of people that you were surrounded by. It's very cool.
Well, when I talk to younger shluchim or younger chassidim, and I say, he was the first one to translate chassidus into English, and they're like, ancient history, so what? Chassidus is English. It's always been English. You mean you can actually say it in Yiddish? Wow, you know Yiddish?
It's truth.
Yeah. So this reminiscing is not interesting to the younger generation. Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. But it was very soul-satisfying experiences. Now, Dr. Block and Dr. Hanoka were Balei Tshuva in their younger years. Velvel Green became a Baal Tshuva after he was a father of children. Different. Velvel was a professor before he became a chassid. And these guys were students when they became chassidim. So it's a different experience. Actually, just to quote Velvel, somebody asked him, are you a chassid? I think his answer was very appropriate. He says, there are some things you can't call yourself. If others say it about you, then it's okay, but you can't. He says, like, intellectual. Are you an intellectual? Anybody who walks around saying, I'm an intellectual is a total idiot. So he said, am I a chassid? I can't say that. You think I'm a chassid, then I'm probably a chassid. And it turns out that just very recently, they had a clip of Rebbitzin Rebbetzin Oltein. And she said that when she was growing up, she never heard the term Chassidish. Chassidim did not refer to themselves as Chassidish. So now it makes sense. You don't call yourself Chassidish.
The community.
Yeah. Anyway, so the third person in the picture is also an American product. His entire Hasidus experience is from the Rebbe. Not from the previous Rebbe, not from the Rebbe before that.
Rabbi Lou, you mean?
Rabbi Shmulu. The only thing is that he was religious and observant before he became a Chassid. So Hasidus was new, not Yiddishkeit. So you have very different personalities there and very different experiences. And they sit there together like they were soulmates. Rabbi Hanoka, of course, Dr. Hanoka, comes from a Sephardic background, hence the name. You don't have too many Ashkenazim who call themselves Hanoka or Hanukkah.
If you think I'm Hanukkah, then I'm Hanukkah.
The other guy is Purim. So you have such different personalities and different backgrounds, coming from a Sephardic background, coming from a Frum background, coming from Nashville, Tennessee. What was that famous for?
Jazz.
I don't know, the music place. What's that called? The famous
Dreamland or something?
No. That's Elvis. Grand Ole Opry. Anyway, so this is what the Rebbe pulled out of his hat. Those three guys tells you the whole story. The Rebbe can make a chassid out of a kid from Nashville. The Rebbe can make a chassid out of a student with a Sephardic background. The Rebbe can even make a chassid out of a guy who's from.
That's the scary part. Oh, great. There's some things you can't call yourself. That's good. I'm sorry to tell you that we didn't cover everybody that we were supposed to cover, and we have a lot more to talk about.
It is good. It is good.
I want to thank who?
Your brother, what's his name?
My brother. No.
Who are you trying to remember?
Yechiel Kagan. Sorry. I'm trying to thank Yechiel Kagan because last week after the interview, a bunch of people told me that my camera is terrible and it's very blurry. And Yechiel Kagan called and said, "What a great 2 hours that was. Can I buy you a new camera?" And he did.
Wow.
And we're on the new camera. So thank you, Yechiel. Hope it's better. So thank you, Ta. And Mitzvah will do this again soon. Yeah.
Tell people who Yechiel is.
What did you say?
Tell people who Yechiel Kagan is.
Yechiel Kagan.
They're all reading his book.
How about you tell people who Yechiel Kagan is?
Yechiel Kagan produced the books My Story, interviews with different people about their experience with the Rebbe. So he knows what interviews are supposed to look like.
Yeah, well, now I asked him if he's going to start doing these these in my encounter interviews over the internet. It's a mashu acher. But yes, he has the privilege of being responsible for having preserved and kept alive unbelievable amount of memories and stories about the Rebbe. Beautiful stories. In Bichlal, him and Elkanah Shmutkin put together, or whoever else is responsible for it, put together a philosophy, not just a business, but a philosophy about what the Rebbe would want preserved and eternalized about him. Very interesting. I learned a lot from being involved with them, from helping them with titles and whatever. That the stories have to be about the person as opposed to about the Rebbe. Of course, the whole book is about the Rebbe, but it's about the people and their encounters with the Rebbe, which makes it much more true. And that the stories have to emphasize people's lives and not miracles. And has made, if you read these books, has made for really amazing stories, but amazing in a real way, not amazing in an otherworldly way. They took Azak Greisa Rebbe and put him into Azak Kleiner book. Yeah.
They're also very careful with the Rebbe's picture.
Yeah, like not flipping the negative.
The Rebbe didn't like pictures in which he looked too serious.
Rebbe what?
Did not like pictures in which he appeared too serious, without a smile. The Rebbe felt that there was enough seriousness in the world. You didn't have to. I know from personal experience that Rebbe was very particular about his pictures. So they're careful. They're careful about it. And some people just put up these pictures that are just, that Rebbe would not like it.
You had a story with Lubavitch in Minnesota, no? Trying to use a particular picture, and the Rebbe asked you not to use it?
It was a painting, a watercolor. And in the original, it was awesome, beautiful, really talented. A Russian who never saw the Rebbe did a painting from a picture. And it was really good looking. It was hanging in my parents' house for a long time. But when we made a copy of it for printing, it didn't come out right. So we thought it would be artistic to put a painting in rather than a photograph. But the Rebbe said, change it. It's all faded out.
Yeah, that's a discussion by a whole different discussion about the Rebbe and his picture.
Yeah.
That the Rebbe, not only the Rebbe allowed it, but the Rebbe saw in it a potential. In general, the Rebbe's ability to lower his standards, not his standards, but to lower himself to a generation that needs certain things. Look at the Rebbe's insistence on putting a picture on the front of a sefer. The picture of the author. Even a Rebbe, if you can get a picture, put the picture at the beginning of the book because it makes it more interesting. The Rebbe said, create an index, create an encyclopedia, create things that make learning more interesting. And others would have said, this is no way, you don't have to lower the standards of learning so that the average common man will find it interesting with pictures and indexes and interesting, easy ways to learn. Make people work hard. And the Rebbe did both. And with the pictures, one major thing. At the beginning, the Rebbe didn't like people taking pictures of him, but then he said, if it's going to help, let's do it. But let's do it right.
If I'm not mistaken, all the years that the Rebbe objected to having his picture taken is because the people taking the pictures were amateurs. They were sitting with a camera, and they said, But when professional photographers came around, they said, okay, this is good.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's traditionally, authors never put their picture on the book. Rashi. don't see a picture of him anywhere.
Yes, all the pictures of Rashi are very well hidden away.
Uh-huh. Maybe for the same reason. they were professionals.
All right. Sehr good. Thank you very much for another 2 good hours. And to be continued in Mitzvah Shem.
And don't forget that one of these days we have to interview you and find out how you got inspired. You got to keep the chain going.
Okay. One day.
Then we'll interview your son and see who inspired him.
Or my daughter.
Hi, Liba.
Liba, say hello.
Hi.
Come into the picture. Ah, there you are. Hi, hi, hi. Alrighty.
Look up here. Look up here. This is the camera, Liba. There we go.
An enjoyable trip down memory lane.
Memory lane leads to the future. All right. Tag is on tough. Be well.
Bye, Liba.
Up here. There you go. You have to look up here and there at the same time.